And now a reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of Jesus' disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all of the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, like the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. And so the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrine. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then Jesus called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you. There is not one thing outside of a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All of these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Something I like to do in the evenings after I get all the kids to bed is just spend a few minutes poking around on YouTube, finding a fun video, just a few minutes to kind of see and take my mind off of the day. And if you've ever done this yourself, you'll know that once you finish a video on YouTube, there's a bunch of suggestions that like to pop up, things that YouTube thinks you might also like to see. And so sometimes I start with one video and I see something really interesting and I click on that, and another thing pops up after that video is done and I click on that, and before I know it, I'm looking at videos that I never would have searched for myself, and I can kind of find myself down the rabbit hole. And so a few weeks ago I was doing this and I found myself down the rabbit hole in YouTube watching videos on lock picking. It turns out there's a whole community of people on YouTube that have, as just kind of a hobby, picking locks of different kinds, either deadbolts or car locks or bike locks or anything they can get their hands on. They don't even have it attached to anything. They just have the lock out, and they talk about this process of finding all of the tumblers and the dials and the discs and picking them open one by one. And if that sounds like a really boring, kind of dull video to watch, I can assure you that on the surface it definitely is. There's nothing exciting about it. Lock picking doesn't even film very well because it all happens inside of a lock that you can't see. But there was something about these videos that just drew me in, and I think it was just kind of the excitement of the people who were doing this lockpicking. They'd spent hours and hours kind of mastering all these skills and were putting them to use and talking about all the different histories and styles, and you could just hear in their voices this kind of excitement around this really geeky, weird topic. And I remember coming across one video specifically that really made me laugh. It was a video of this hobbyist lockpicker who wanted to see if he could get his wife also interested in picking locks. And so he had a plan. He got a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, his wife's favorite flavor, and had a lock that fit over the ice cream lid, locking it to the rest of the pint with a few little combination unlock things. And as he put this all together, he had a video explaining what he hoped would happen, that he'd put it in the freezer and his wife could try and pick it herself. And there were a couple of what he thought were pretty easy inconsistencies with this lock that she could exploit and get it picked open. And so he kind of set his little trap. He told his wife, "Oh, I've got ice cream for you." And the next part of the video cuts to the next day, where the lock picker opens up his freezer to find that the ice cream is there with the lock still attached to the lid, but that the whole container had been flipped upside down, and that the bottom of the ice cream container had been cut off with scissors, and his wife had eaten about 2/3 of the ice cream already. That video ends with the lockpicker going, "Well, I guess I didn't really expect that, but there you go." And the video ends. And I can't help but think of that video as I was reading and looking at the gospel reading for today. Because I feel like these Pharisees are very much like some of these hobbyist lockpickers. You see, the Pharisees are the people of rules. They are the ones who know all the rules, and they're into them, and they understand where they come from and how following God's rules will lead to, a good life. And the Pharisees have been watching Jesus do some different things, and they spot Jesus' disciples not following one of the rules. And so here now, their trap is sprung. They have a way to talk to Jesus about this thing they're really passionate about. They're ready to debate this rule that they have about eating with defiled hands, about washing and cleanliness, and a way of keeping clean throughout the whole year for the whole community. And while they're all ready to go, you can imagine them kind of preparing their arguments. They make one critical mistake. When they bring it up to Jesus, they ask Jesus a why question. They don't say, maybe you should wash your hands before you eat. They ask Jesus, why? Why aren't your disciples doing this? And when you ask a why question, it opens things up. Now Jesus doesn't just talk about the rule that they have, which, by the way, I want to say is a pretty good rule. As far as rules go, washing your hands before you eat, it's not a bad choice. It's just a good thing to do. Of course, we know germ theory, but especially back in the first century, having a community-wide rule about cleanliness, about keeping clean, about washing, and even about taking that time before eating, a few times every day, to stop and to think about your relationship with God. That's a powerful thing. That's a good ritual, a good rule to have. I think the Pharisees are probably right on this one, that everybody should be doing this. And so while the Pharisees are preparing their arguments, they're ready to debate all of the intricacies of this rule and this law with Jesus. What Jesus does is effectively take their argument, flip it upside down, and cut through the cardboard to get to the ice cream. Jesus skips over the whole rule altogether, and he tackles that why question. And he says that why is not just about how we eat. It's not about how we avoid disease. It's about the community. It's about keeping the community safe. It's about people being able to gather together and to care for one another, essentially. And so Jesus says, yes, sure, you've got a lock handled on this washing your hands part, but you've missed the entire rest of the problem. You've got a big security hole over here in what comes out of people. Jesus points out that a part of keeping the community safe isn't just protecting it from disease or from outsiders somehow, but it's protecting the community from what breaks up most communities. The people within it, not caring for one another, struggling, having problems, having disagreements. That why question opens up the conversation to looking at the whole system instead of just a small part. I don't think the Pharisees were quite ready for that, but that is what Jesus is about. It's about turning the world upside down. Not saying that even the rules that the Pharisees were trying to enforce were wrong, but getting us to look at the bigger picture. Getting us to look at the why of why we do something instead of just the what or the how. And that's what I think Jesus is calling all of us to do today. Because every one of us, I think, can be a little bit like those Pharisees or like those lock-picking nerds on YouTube. We get so focused on the thing that we're a part of the thing that we're passionate about, or the thing that we like, that we can lose focus of everything else, that we lose focus of the why. This can happen to us in our jobs, where maybe we're focused on our portion of the project so much that we don't notice when the whole project starts to shift in scope, and maybe the part we're working on doesn't make sense anymore. It could happen even in our families, when maybe we're focused on one particular child or a particular set of grades in school, and we stop noticing some of the other things that might be happening interpersonally between people. And it can even happen at church. It can happen in our community that we gather here at Grace, where maybe we start getting focused on a building, or whether we worship inside or outside, or what kind of music we have, or what programming might look like for kids or older adults. And we can lose track of the bigger picture. It's hard, though, because all of these things, all of these individual things that we can focus on, they are important. Even that rule that Jesus kind of ignored in that conversation, it was an important rule. Wash your hands before you eat. In the first century, that can save lives. We know it can save lives now even. And yet, what Jesus calls out as being even more important is to ask that question, why? To open up a conversation around the bigger picture. And so I'm going to ask that question now about us here at Grace. Why? Why do we gather in this way, online or outside or in person? Why are we a church? What does it mean to be a people who call themselves Grace Lutheran Church? And that question then becomes a little bit bigger than building maintenance or a youth program or older adults or what style of music we have. It becomes about how we live together as a community, as people who try and follow Jesus, as people who try and care for one another, as people who try and care for the world, to work for justice and peace, to try and care for those most at need and on the margins of our own society. Asking why changes our focus. We still need to have all those detail-oriented things. We still need people who watch the budgets and have Excel spreadsheets and who make sure that the building does not fall down around us. But we also need to ask why. We need to ask, what are those things that we might be missing collectively as a church? How do we reach out to people who might never step into a building like this? How do we follow in the footsteps of Jesus while a virus is ravaging our country and our world? Who are we called to be today, here and now? These are big questions. They pull us out of our comfort zones. They're not easy answers to any of them, and yet we still need to work on all those little details in between. But this is the job that God has given to us. This is the calling that God has for all of us, to be God's people in a new and uncertain world, to care for one another and to care for those most at need. It's not easy, but God has promised to walk with us, and God is here with us as we struggle with all of these uncertainties, as we work together to try and figure things out. God is here with us when we make mistakes, and God is here with us when, in spite of ourselves, we get a few things right. And we start to change one another's hearts, and we start to change our community, and we start to change our whole world. It's not easy, but it starts with just one question. Why? Amen.